Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's virtual programs. My name is Nicholas Brown, and I am the Chief Operating Officer for Communication and Outreach at the Library System. We are based in Maryland. I know that we've got folks tuning in from Mississippi, and we might have our Canadian and Hawaiian contingent out there tonight, as well as our very good friend, Miss Vivian from Oxon Hill. So thank you all for tuning in. We know that there's a lot to pick from in the evening, and the news is certainly a giant distraction tonight. So we hope to offer you some really great programming that we're confident will provoke some thought and reflection. Tonight's program is co-presented with the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission, which is the county's civil rights education and enforcement agency. It's a very important agency that helps advance our collective cause as a community to ensure that there's diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism in everything that we do together. Tonight's program is part of our ongoing series between the library and the Human Relations Commission. Before I introduce our two speakers, I would love to introduce our moderators. And we have two good friends who are probably familiar to many of you. And they are Renee Battle-Brooks, who is the Executive Director of the Human Relations Commission, and Kyla Hannington, who is the Human Relations Commission's Public Information Officer and Outreach Coordinator. So I'm going to add them to the screen real quick here, and they can give you a wave. Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. And we're going to switch over to introducing our very special guests. We're deeply, deeply honored to have with us tonight. Our first guest is Ellen Ann Fentress. She writes about Deep South politics and culture, looking for how big truths pulse in individual life stories. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Baffler, Oxford American, Scalawag, Story South, and New Madrid, as well as on Mississippi Public Radio, where she was a reporter. She launched the Academy's Stories Project in 2009, an online forum about the impact of the South's circa 1970s segregation academies on their past and present. Her documentary, Eyes on Mississippi, a 56-minute film on the career of iconic civil rights journalist Bill Miner, is screened at universities and other venues around the country. As a print journalist, she's worked for the New York Times, Time, Newsweek, Reuters, the Associated Press, the Biloxi Gulfport Sun-Herald, and the Capitol Reporter, to say nothing of the Catfish Journal. She is a visiting writer in the Mississippi University for Women's Creative Writing MFA program, and also teaches creative nonfiction in the Millsaps College Community Enrichment Program and in other community workshops. Ellen Ann is an MFA graduate of Bennington College. Welcome to Ellen Ann. Thanks for joining us. And our second special guest this evening is Neely Tucker, who is based here in Washington, D.C. Neely is a novelist, journalist, and author, and a seventh-generation Mississippian. He was born in Holmes County, which was then the poorest county in the poorest state in America. His newspaper work includes stops at the Miami Herald, the Detroit Free Press, and 17 years at the Washington Post. As a foreign correspondent, he was based in Poland and Zimbabwe, working in more than 60 countries or territories, covering civil wars or violent uprisings in Europe, the Mideast, and Africa. His memoir, Love in the Driest Season, was named one of the best 25 books of 2004 by Publishers Weekly, the American Booksellers Association, New York City Library, and also won numerous other awards. Another book, or another story, Life After Death, a story about his wife's 7-year odyssey to help convict her daughter's killer, was nominated by the Post for the 2011 Pulitzer Prize. And we are very, very pleased and honored to welcome Neely to tonight's panel. So throughout the program, we ask that you engage with us on social media. You can tag the library at PGCMLS on all platforms. Also, HRC is on all platforms. If you type in HRC PG County, you'll find it on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Sorry, not on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And if you would be so inclined, we would love to have you share the live broadcast link on your own social media networks to help us reach as many people as possible. The program will be available on demand for viewing at your leisure after we end the broadcast. And we'll see you on the chat and the comments. And I'll turn things over to Kyla and Renee. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you to Neely and Ellen Ann for joining us tonight. We have been really looking forward to this conversation. And so I'm actually hoping you can start us off, Ellen Ann, by just telling us about the project. We're talking about the Academy stories, but we realize there are probably a lot of people watching who don't know what that is. So could you take that away and explain that to us?
Yes, thanks. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to have this opportunity to talk about the project. I think it's such an issue in the South, but also it's just a template for the wider question of of looking at systemic racism in the country at large now. And it just seems to, the conversation seems to become more essential with every week. So I became interested in it in the project in 2018 when Cindy Hyde-Smith. Nick, if you had time to put up that first PowerPoint, that'd be great. I became interested in when Cindy Hyde-Smith, now a senator from Mississippi, was running for Senate. It came out in Mississippi, it came out in Mississippi that she was a graduate of one of the legacy segregation academies. Here's her picture. The thing was, so many of us in Mississippi are graduates of these academies. I was, Neely was, and it became a national story, and there was such a national shock. And to me, there was such a disconnect with the way it had become normalized here, and people didn't even think about their history. And it was so shocking to people from outside the South. So that got me thinking about it. And then right after that was when, do you remember some of the stories, Ralph Northam and the blackface stories started becoming in the news in early 2019. And I heard Casey Lehman speaking at the bookstore here in Jackson saying, you know what, every time a politician was caught in one of these stories, they always had a reason about it. It wasn't me, and there was a reason and a rationalization. He said, you know what, I want to see a story of someone that says, yeah, that was me, and this is what I was thinking. And I started thinking, I didn't have a blackface, but I had one that was just pretty awful. And like, okay, I'm going to do that. And so I started thinking about it, and I wrote my story for The Bitter Southerner. The headline for it came out in June of 2019 was, "Are you a SEG Academy alum too? Let's talk." And when it came out, I heard from people all over the country. Actually, I heard from people in Europe too that had been Segregation Academy graduates. I got the idea to get a humanities grant and start this website to collect our stories. Because, I think like the heroic stories coming out of the integration experience, those, we've seen those. The people in the Segregation Academy don't talk about it too much. But I think the reason that we want to cherry pick our history is just, it's the epitome of white privilege that we get to pick our history that we tell, and then we hide the history that we don't. So I think if there's a reticence to talk about it, that's the very reason to talk about it. So I started collecting these stories, and the website premiered in October of 2019, and got a big response. It's going on. Neely's has been the most viral story. He had a stunning story, and he told it like it is. I want Neely to talk about it. And now I've opened it to from the other side, from the public school side, but it's more than the public school side. There's also the story of people that simply, it's an economic story too, of simply left towns because it was so polarized. It became blacks were in the public school, whites were in a segregation academy. And if you had a choice, it was just like, well, I'll live in another town with a more, with a more vibrant school system that everybody attends. So there's also a number of stories of people who left the South. And in the future, it's an ongoing project, admissions.com. And we're going to do some videos. And I invite everybody listening to be in touch and tell me your story. All right, that's enough for now. I might get into a little bit more of the history and some of the images later on, but that's enough to get started.
All right, thank you very much for that. I was wondering, Neely, did you want to talk about can you introduce us to yourself and how you're here and what your experience was?
Yeah, just briefly, I grew up in Mississippi, like you mentioned. My people have been doing for a really long time. Was born over in Holmes County. My dad worked for the Extension Service. We came over to Starkville, which is where Mississippi State is. And my first day of first grade was the first day that Oktibbeha County, Starkville, opened the segregation academies. And just sort of blissfully ignorant like everyone else. It was perceived as that you were getting a better education. I don't think that anyone who went to one of the academies did not hear that phrase as to why we were there. It was better education, smaller classes, and that sort of thing. Of course, there's a great intellectual split from that, there were no mass of incoming better teachers to teach us new things. And there was no parallel that if you went to the academy, well, all of us went to Harvard and Yale and Princeton. Pretty much everybody went to Mississippi State, which is, or Ole Miss or Southern or the W, one of the schools in state. So, but there was a perception that you were getting a better education. And what was really never mentioned was that you were getting a better education because there were no Black people here. Nobody had to say that. I don't think I ever heard anybody tell me that, listen, kids, today we're going to talk about how, okay, white people are better than Black people. And it's a little uncomfortable to mention, but it's true. And let's talk about it. No one ever said that because you didn't have to in that environment, in that place and time. Nobody has to tell you the sky is blue, and nobody has to tell you the grass is green. And in Mississippi in the 1970s and 80s, nobody had to tell you that private schools were better, quote unquote better, because it was just white kids.
That's it. And I think one of the things that I wanted to write about in my piece, and I see is what I think resonates today, two generations later, is the silo thinking that's the result of being in an environment like that. Is that a quality education to have such silo thinking? I think, I think it plays out in the news right now when you see to just only be around one way of thinking and not getting out. It's just, you can't question it. I don't know that you can have critical thinking if you're only around one. There's nothing to distinguish or discern if you're only around one kind of thing.
I do have a question, actually a couple. One really is, based on what you've both said, was there ever a time during your tenure at the academies that there was sort of this, not awareness, but even sort of this awakening or any little thing that came to you that the real subtext was exactly what we're talking about today? Was there a moment during your academy times?
Oh, it was very clear to me while we were there, because yes, very clear. It was the court order. There had been the court order for massive integration, Alexander v. Holmes in Mississippi in 1970, and so many people were just lifted out of our public school and put in Pillow Academy. It was very clear while we were there.
And so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you said you are not. There was no overt talk. That was overt talk at my school. I mean, there was certainly. I mean, not every day, but there was.
There was. I mean, by that I meant as far as teachers and principals and administration, overtly telling you in class. There's a lot of racist chatter around school, of course. I mean, that was every day. But one of the things that the schools never did tell you was what Ellen Ann just said of Alexander v. Holmes. Which again, Holmes County, that's where I'm from. That's the test case that went to the Supreme Court that began massive integration or massive resistance. Everybody knows Brown v. Board, but the nation didn't really integrate after Brown v. Board. The nation really integrated when the Supreme Court said that, okay, you've had all your reasonable time to integrate, do it now. And that's when you had this explosion of academies across the South as part of this massive resistance of white parents to keeping their kids away from Black kids. You were never taught that. And if you go to the website for the school system right now, I just checked it before we went on air. They don't call themselves private schools anymore. It's independent schools. And at the Mid-South Association of Independent Schools, on its history, right now today, it will tell you everything and anything about the culture and the situation in the 1960s, except that they formed the school systems to avoid that they were segregated academies. They'll tell you that the only mention of Martin Luther King is that he led the Poor People's March. There was the Vietnam War. Hot tubs were created. People went to the moon. And in Mississippi, a group of men met and decided to form a new school association. That's the history. And that's what begins to answer your question. when you get to be a teenager at 16 or 17 and you start wondering, looking around at things and starting to really, sort of turn on, that's what began to really stink, at least to me. I couldn't have articulated it then, but something began to feel just plain wrong.
Right. And then one other question. I've got lots, but I'm going to let Kyla ask some. So the term segregation academies, I'm assuming that's not a term that was used while Ellen Ann, you were in school, or Neely, you were in school, but sort of talk about that term, how, where it came from, if you know, or did you coin it?
Yeah.
Well, none of the schools would call themselves that. They do not like that term at all. And now a generation later, since the 1990s, the schools have had a small, they've had a small Black enrollment, but it's still overwhelmingly white. But so I think that early on, that kind of became a critical name that some looking on from the outside had from them. Neely, when was the first time you heard the term segregation academy?
Wow, long after I left. The term of currency back then was private high school. You're a High kid. You go to the High, huh? And that was what I heard. But everybody, again, you knew without anybody saying that everyone knew what that was, that it was segregated. And I think I put in the essay, I mean, there was one person, Black person allowed on our school grounds, and that was a janitor. It's pretty hard to miss.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Kyla, do you have some?
Well, I wanted to ask a question, and Ellen Ann, you talk about it in your Better Southerner essay a little bit, and I'm hoping you can help us tease that out, which is you've been in this very siloed education that's not real. And then now you're 18 and you graduate. How is that for your experience? Like, what happens to you when you leave, in your case, the Pillow Academy? What came next?
Well, in Mississippi, then you go to school in Mississippi, and then you live in Mississippi, and you think this is normal. Yeah, there's not a big awakening if you don't get out. Neely and I were talking the other day, and he was saying, when was the first time you had a Black teacher? I never had a Black teacher. I never had one in college. The first time I had a Black supervisor would have been as a working reporter, and having Black editors. And that's, so coming out of that environment, that's just really kind of a distorted way of thinking to then go into the, to the regular world after that. Growing up in Greenwood was about 50% Black, 50% white. I did not know one single Black person my age. So at that time, and that's a quality education. And then we're going to live in this state and thrive in this state and contribute to the state. Yet you've been kept away from 50% of the people in your town. No. I'm really excited about a story that's about to come up with someone who was my counterpart. It was a white student whose family stayed in public school in Greenwood. And he was telling me about someone our age. If you're a jazz fan, I'm sure you know this name, Mulgrew Miller. Look him up. He was he was a jazz great, played with all the greats, Duke Ellington, and he's passed away sadly at 57. But he was the great, and here we were having a quality education at Pilla, and I'd never heard of him until this week. That's pretty tragic.
Yeah, I through my dad's work in the Extension Service, we drove around with him around the state a fair amount, and so I had a lot of interactions with Black folks. And I went to work at the grocery store in our town of Starkville when I was 14 or 15. I think they looked the other way and let me start working when I was 14. But that was the first time I'd worked alongside and really had daily interactions with Black folks, like Ellen Ann says, of my age. And when I went back to give this talk to the school recently, what I had told them was that what I'm going to tell you isn't a horror story and you're in it. To go back to Kiese's point on the thing, this is a horror story and you're the monster in it. And I'm the monster in it. It isn't anybody else. The definition of a redneck in Mississippi, it's the people in the next county. It's never you. You are never the problem. You and your friends aren't it. It's those guys over there. They're the problems. You can go to all 82 counties in Mississippi and you'll never find the problem, except that it's everywhere. And Mississippi, I want to, again, to Ellen Ann's point, it's a microcosm. It's more intense than the rest of the United States. But I think the rest of the United States tries to give itself a free pass by saying we're better than Mississippi. One, that's not setting the bar very high. And number two, it's not true. So I think there's a temptation to look at this as an especially horrible experience. And instead, I think it's just a much more concentrated experience of what the United States has been like in the past half century.
I think that's such a great point, Neely. You know, as human beings, that's our natural defense. That's not me, it's them, right? I did want to ask, before we move on to another sort of topic about segregation academies, can either of you describe sort of any negative reactions that came about as a result of this project? Now, we know that, you know, the defenses that you said, better education, smaller classes, you know, that's sort of the subterfuge. But what if any, how was it articulated, or what was said in defense of it? Or maybe there hasn't been, but I can't imagine that in our current climate, there wouldn't be an outright sort of defense of it.
Well, it becomes, you know, you can look back and look at the Civil War, you can look back at something else, and this is so far removed, you can say, oh, I understand now. It's not what this Moonlight Magnolias that I was fed. No, it's about something else. It's just, it's harder, it's emotionally harder, and it's tough to look back, and it's something that, you know, people that you respected and your parents, you know, respected people in the community founded, and many of them are still living. And it's just, it's hard to look at that and reject the system and look at it hard. Yeah, these are the people that you loved and looked up to. So I think that makes it hard. And I think it makes it very hard to speak up sometimes. I've had a number of people tell me, love the project. It's absolutely true. I'm not writing one of those.
And there's the great temptation, I think, to think, you know, it's all past. It's in a microcosm, you know, it's in this amber colored thing. There's a sepia tone photograph. Well, the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. There were more than 3,000 challenges to it before it was recently gutted by the John Roberts-led Supreme Court. It's not in the past, and it never has been. And I think it's I think it's problematic to think that these schools existed at a time, and now they've got a couple of Black kids or Indian kids, a couple of Hispanic kids, and it's all okay now. It's just become so normalized and become such a part of our lives that, like everything else, we just accept another part of white supremacy as just being the normal.
Yeah. Kyla, do you have any questions? Or I have, again.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. It's the Renee show. All right.
No, I have lots, but you go ahead, take it.
Okay, just one more. And usually I would try and ask this towards the end, but I think it's important to ask now. You know, if there's somebody that's listening, or somebody listening who knows somebody who is sort of in light of what's happened in our American culture over the last 9-10 months, that is now has this reawakening, or awakening for the first time, what sort of words of wisdom would you give them, or how do they start this journey of self-reflection? And that's really applicable to all of us in all areas. But right now I'm just focusing on the topic today, but it is sort of something that we all can learn. How do you start? How do you tackle this self-reflection and acknowledgement, and maybe accepting culpability, or, you know, I don't know. And that's for all of us in life.
Well, prepare to get uncomfortable, because if you're not making yourself uncomfortable, you're not challenging it. I love the book White Fragility, and that's what I see when people that try to give me a reason why not to do the project about, oh, you know, this is in the past, or you're going to hurt some people's feelings. You had some nice teachers, and I certainly did. I had some very nice teachers. To not challenge it is to say, I would rather stay comfortable. It's more important for me to stay comfortable with myself and not think about it than it is to grow, and it is to be a more, a more contributing person in society now. That it's more important for me to stay comfortable than to learn something.
Mm-hmm. And there's not, I think there's a sense, or there should be a sense of urgency. If that you think perhaps maybe I live in a little bit of a silo, or maybe I don't quite seem to be getting out as much as I would like to, there should be this sense of urgency that if you need to know how to live in a world, in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious world in which you and people who look like you do not always control the shots and are not in charge of getting you what you want. I think white Americans would do themselves a great favor by working in situations in which they need something, whether it's a raise or a promotion, advancement of some sort, an A in your class, and the person holding the keys to what you want is an African American. Not just a minority, that's good, but specifically an African American. I think that is because what as Ellen Ann mentioned, the uncomfort, you'll find yourself that the first time or two this happens, you'll find that you're uncomfortable, and you'll be surprised that you're uncomfortable. And that's okay. That's not a sign to stop. That's a sign that you need to keep making progress.
Excellent. Thank you.
And there's value in that. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'll subject myself to this.
I think it's going to be
that you need.
Mm-hmm. Right. One thing about the project I do want to say, since I have opened it up to stories from the public schools, and I've been so interested to see some of the stories. Ralph Eubanks has a wonderful story on the site, who's also in the DC area. He about the experience there that, what did I know? I was in the academy, but of Black students saying, I don't know why white students even went to the academy. This was still such a white-centered experience in the iteration. And all the ways that it was actually, it was not handled in so many places. It was not handled in good faith in the public schools, and it was so many times Black, and the Black school, the traditional Black school was shut down, lost their traditions, lost their great, legendary leaders and teachers, and everybody was put together, and the Black teachers lost their authority. They became the co-principal or the co-band leader, and it was not handled. I wonder, as for the project going into the future, one thing I want to do is look at what of it. I mean, if we're just going to do negative nostalgia, that's not productive. I think what is productive is calling ourselves up about how it shaped us now and what we need to do about it. But also more than that, what can be done about it. And I think there are different answers for different communities with different situations. I wonder with some of these, I would love to see a town. I can't imagine people not being protective of their institution in this happening, of saying, it was never handled in good faith in the public school. The academy is a wreck. Let's do it again. Let's just see what we come up with. We are people in 2021. Well, let's give it a try. Let's see, what can we do now that will make it work? And maybe we don't go, even though it's the moral thing to do, don't lead with it's all about morality. It's about economics, It's about this makes good sense for our town to thrive.
Right.
That kind of leads me to a question that I did have, which was just about, and you touched on it, Ellen, and I kind of want to tease it out, which is the deficit of your education, that you're being told or presented like it's somehow better, but in fact, the loss that I'm assuming, I'm hearing, and you touched on this. I'm hoping you can speak more to that about the limitations and the way in which your education was so negatively impacted by having such a narrow focus.
Right. I feel like I'm certainly a spotty, and at the same time, there were some wonderful teachers. A lot of people just walked right over from the public school. Many good teachers walked right over from the public school and started teaching the academy. So, in a book and pencil and paper sense, I think I had some good teachers in that sense. But if you're just never around 50% of the people in your town or that, and there also were, it was like they couldn't have the bells and whistles in this school in a steel building in the in a cotton field like they did. I mean, even, public school had things like French. I became a French major in college, maybe because of that. And my first French class in college, that was my first French class. I said I was a major, but I'd never had a French class when I showed up. That idea of, I was telling you about Mulgrew Miller, who was my age in Greenwood. I never knew him. And while we were there with the band, Tapilla, Mulgrew Miller, who was going to go on to be with Duke Ellington and played in 45 countries around the world, was right there in my age at Greenwood High School, putting it, and they were going all around with putting it on the map, won many prizes.
Yeah, and again, when you grow up in that little silo, even if you think you're in a better environment, you're swimming in an aquarium, in a goldfish bowl. Mm-hmm. And you come to think that if I'm paying, my parents are paying for this, so it has to be better than the free public school. The same way if you bought a BMW, you would think that was better than a Ford. So you graduate with this unearned sense of superiority, and that if I'm doing good in this school, then I must really be doing great compared to these knuckleheads over there in the public school. Well, that's not necessarily true at all. You're not getting to compete against the best people in your environment. And when I went back to give this speech at my high school, they asked me to come, obviously, because I wrote. And I said, I appreciate it. It's really great. However, let's compare me, who you were saying from the segregated academy, is there were only 8 people they had given this award to, right? So I'm one of the best 8 people, according to you guys, who's ever been here. Well, let's see how I stack up against, I don't know, let's pick the poorest state in America and part of the population that has had the roughest time there. Let's pick African-American women in Mississippi. How do I stack up against that group? Well, let's look at Angie Thomas, #1 bestseller, 2 #1 bestsellers, movie made out of her stuff, The Hate You Give. There's Jessamine Ward, 2-time National Book Award winner. I don't even have 1 National Book Award. Natasha Trethewey, Poet Laureate of the United States and Pulitzer Prize winner. I don't have any of those. So the best I can be among African-American women in the poorest state in America is 4th. And I'm the best you got. I don't really know that that's something to crow about. Mm-hmm. Except if you're writing in Mississippi, then everything's crazy. But that was the point I wanted to make to them. You're not getting to compete against the best. And you cannot be the best. You cannot excel if you're not playing with the best.
How was that received?
Quietly. I don't know. I mean, there were a couple hundred kids in that auditorium. I knew this was not going to be, that well received. But honestly, I was trying to talk to maybe 5 kids in there. Yeah. If 295, it was before a pep rally. Who wants to hear this old guy up there talking about something? We're monsters. What did he say? We got a football game tonight. But I was hoping that there would be, if there was somebody else like me in that class when I was there that knew that something didn't quite smell right, but I didn't know what it was. I wanted to try to articulate that.
Yeah. No,
nobody was mean to me, though. Nobody said anything bad. They didn't take the thing back, and nobody threw anything at me. So it's okay.
Success.
That's what I find the good Southern way is that I rarely have someone who comes at me, just like offended by the project and getting it. It's just like the Southern way. It's just silence. Either, there's nothing said.
I think that's a very interesting cultural way for us to understand in terms of Southern culture. Right.
Well, white Southerners, and it's probably a prize across the color line too, they're just incredibly polite right up until they're mad enough to kill you. And there's, about 200 years of history that sort of demonstrate that. They're, generally just incredibly polite people. They can be mad as they can be at you. But when it comes to race, Ellen Ann and I were talking about this, it's rare to have a reasonable conversation. It goes from 0 to 100, right? That's usually the way it goes. Either people don't say anything or they'll be, really angry at you.
And the anger, it's the anger is that fragility. It's just, it's just like it is such an explosive subject because of this idea that we have the right not to be made to feel uncomfortable or to be challenged.
And there's the crux, but that's human nature for all of us, right? But maybe go ahead.
And now I try to explain to people, like, you'll get people, and the basis of that book, White Fragility, is the lady who's been leading diversity seminars for 25 or 30 years. And that how quickly white people in these organizations or companies in which they had been asked to come in, that we have a diversity problem. We don't have enough people of color in here. They come in to give a talk to that group, and the white people in there start yelling at them as soon as they get there, even though their own company has self-identified as having this problem. And you have things, and I am sympathetic to this, that people say, wait a minute, I worked hard to get here. I didn't elbow anybody black out of the way. It wasn't easy to get this job or where I'm at. And the thing I always say is I appreciate that. And I don't doubt that you have run 70 yards very, very hard. You have run this 70 yards. I did too. I ran my 70 yards. But people of color, most particularly African Americans, are running 100 yards. So it's not that you're not running 70 yards. It's not that you're not working hard. It's that other people are having to work harder than you, and you're unaware of it because you get to start in front. You can't see how hard they're running to catch up with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So, and we've talked around this and we've talked directly, but maybe unpack a little bit more about really how attending these academies and now, the speaking out, how has it shaped your future? How do you think it would have been if you hadn't become aware? I don't know. Lots of questions like what? There's a I don't necessarily, well, I do believe in some sense that there's a reason for everything, good or bad, or, we can get into other theological philosophy, whatever it is, but how has it shaped you? Can you see tangible ways? Can you see, how it's going to continue? I don't know if that's too broad a question.
I think it can go either way. And, you can remain in your silo. And you stay in the South, you can stay there your whole life. You don't ever have to get out because that's the way it is. And I just see it this week when I see people that you see them on Facebook, you see them on TV that truly believe, things that they're in their own world. They've got their alternative set of facts. And if that's all you talk to, it really is reality. And I think that's, that comes exactly out of that environment. Yeah, and then I think also sometimes being in an environment like that makes you know you got to work at it, and that the onus is on you. It's not just to sit there and see if the world can't be a little bit better world. No, you need to get out and aggressively change up your world a bit.
Yeah,
I would. Yeah, I think that experience going up there and particularly at the academy, I can't. You don't get to do it over, but I can't. That was such the formative experience of my life, of growing up at the time and place I did, that I can't imagine who I would be without it. And that you have to unlearn so much. At a college professor who was really terrific, Tommy Miller, who really helped me grow up a lot. And he said, when you figure out they're lying to you about race down here, you'll figure out they're lying to you about everything else too. Mm-hmm. And I remember that sentence. It was 35 years ago. I can see everything about it. And it absolutely, that was the point, if you wanted to put a crystal on it, that I left the matrix, right? I left the aquarium. Right. And everything is different from that. And it really does shape everything I see. When I walk into an office or a meeting, I count how many black people are there and how many white people are there. I do this subconsciously, right? If I go to a football game at Mississippi State now, which I still do, even though we lose almost all the time, I count how many black fans are in the stage. Just take notice. All right, okay, how are we doing here on this, right? It's sort of the way that I measure how the world works, because those experiences there were so profound to me of how everything came unglued. As Ellen Ann said, it's not just the bad people in town doing this. It's the church deacons. It's the people you look up to. It's your entire world is false. And that just, I think it would have a profound effect on anybody. And it certainly did on me.
It's interesting. I think Kyle wants to ask a question in a second, but I'm just sort of reflecting on, I grew up and I went to academies, parochial, religious, mm-hmm. from beginning. My first non was really when I went to law school, and it does shape it shapes everything, whatever your environment is. And so I wonder, well, there are lessons there for all of us is the key. There are lessons there for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, this is about the academies, but it's just a template for anyone, any part of the country. And I think,
that's right.
They're white flight public schools too, as far as it's just to look at and all over the country.
That's right. And just reflecting, it was multi-ethnic, racial in these, academies that I went to. The commonality was from a religious focus. That was it. But it was all over the world that I went. So it is fascinating to really reflect on. It does shape everything.
Well, and as you mentioned, of going to that religious school, the academies were incredibly religious. I mean, that's a whole overlay of it wasn't just part of the rationale for them is that they were private also because they wanted to be religious. There was a big thing about, can you pray in school back then? There was a separation of state and church issue. And every single day, there was a prayer before school and a devotional reading at school over the intercom, right? And I really think that most people in that, at any sort of religious school or environment, wherever in the world it is, that at some point you have to come to terms with the fact that other people don't believe this way. No matter how sincere and devout one's belief is, there are other people of good faith and good intention who share nothing of that belief. And that does not make them wrong. And that's part of that maturing aspect of growing up in this everything society.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I have just a couple of things. First of all, for those people watching, if you have any questions that you'd like to bring to Ellen Ann or Neely, please type them into the chat of wherever you're watching, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. We're monitoring all of those, and we'll make sure that we get your questions, or we'll at least try to get your questions. But also, Ellen Ann, I do have a question specifically for you. I know that you have a lot of images, and did you want to go through a little bit more of some of the images that you prepared? Because we'd love to see them if you would like that.
Sure. That's great. And if we have some questions and we need to stop, that's good. Well, I'll just go through a few of them. Yeah, so we had that of Cindy Hyde Smith, and
that's amazing right there.
Yeah, there she was, Cheerleader, and then if you want to go ahead, Nick, and just start moving through the other slides. Yes. Okay. Of course, came out of Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. You look at some of the dates on the on the academies. A few started very early, but 1970 was the mass integration in Mississippi. But starting, if you see a school with a date after 1954, that was in the mind of the person starting the school. That's it. Okay. Go ahead, Nick. You can see here. This is in Mississippi. Look at the Jackson newspapers at that time were notoriously just designed to perpetuate segregation, anti-civil rights. So look at the headline: State seeks answer to adverse ruling on school segregation. That was Brown with an adverse. Okay, go ahead, Nick. Now, this is the Citizens Council. The Citizens Council, as Harding Carter once said, it's the Uptown Klan. It was all the white collar people in town formed it. They said it was to prevent integration by legal means. And
can you go into more detail about that, just for people who are not familiar with the Citizens Council? Can you because I think that for people that's just that's something I'd like a little bit of a deeper dive in, if you could give it.
Yeah, thank you, Kyla, because it's like the academies. It's something people know about here, and other people need to know about it. So the Citizens Council, it was formed within months of the Brown versus Board of Education ruling in my hometown. And its purpose was to use legal means and the white collar community in a town to fight integration in any way possible. And it spread all over the country. I mean, it was a hotbed in the South, but there were chapters everywhere. And as you can see, I have these, this is the newspaper they had, very well funded. When I did the documentary on Bill Miner, a lot of the clips, I had things from Citizens Council productions. They had higher quality productions than the local TV station at the time. They had plenty of money. So go ahead, Nick, if you want to change. So this was the logo for the Citizens Council. And so one of their prime things was working on having alternative schools. Nick, go ahead. Yeah, okay. So I want to tell you this. This is in up towards Prince George's County area, a fellow prince here, but a prince from Virginia. This was an incredible story out of Prince Edward County, Virginia. I believe it was in the late 50s, they were facing integration, and so they just shut down the entire school system for 5 years. And they started Prince Edward Academy. One of our writers is Kristen Green, who's done an excellent book about the experience, and her grandfather helped found the academy. It's a wonderful book. It was acclaimed in the New York Times when it came out, so check it out. But when they closed the public schools for 5 years, the white children started going to the academy. The black children had no school whatsoever for 5 years. Those that could went to another, maybe lived with a relative, went to another school system, but it wasn't there. Later on, there's another book by someone there that's recently come out. Fascinating story. It's the first case of reparations in the country that was voted on by the Virginia legislature in a bipartisan vote. That some of the students, the black students that were affected by that in the county back then, received reparations not too long ago.
I don't know if this is a Neely. I was going to say, Neely, you might know this from just being up in this area. I'm hoping somebody can jump in. There's no county in Virginia, like in sort of northern Virginia, where the same thing, they closed the schools rather than integrate, and nobody went to school. That there was actually just like, so that, and the repercussions of that, of course, continue today among white communities and black communities, where there's just this, now intergenerational impact from the school just completely shutting down versus integration. Is that the same county, do you know, or is that another one?
I don't know of a different one. I think that's the same one that you're thinking about. I think that's the same one, but again, I don't know.
Wasn't this the same academy? I think I was reading where, and maybe it was the author, who, in his moment of clarity, renounced and that his parents were very upset and were basically saying that, they finally finished paying off the loan at, when he reached the age of 32. And so, Kyla, it could be the same place, because if you weren't able, even as a white family, to afford or to get a loan, what did you do?
Right. Okay.
That was the novelist Steve Yarborough.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that line. It was such a poignant line.
Yeah.
And I will say,
you can see this is from a Citizens Council meeting back in the early 60s, I think. It was a national meeting, and look at their theme. How shall we educate our children? Well, badly, huh?
Yep. About the Citizens Council, on which is the body that set up all these academies, that was the backbone organization that did that. Even today, if you look on the independent schools website, you will not see the Citizens Council mentioned. And I mean, again, that's part of why I say this. It's not just in the past. There's a constant erasing across the nation's history, but particularly, again, concentrated in these things of erasing what was very blatantly racially done.
Because I've noticed that I'm looking at schools like Heritage in Columbus, Mississippi, and the Pillow Academy in Greenwood, and looking to see, on their website, what does it say about the founding of those stories? And I know from just having looked at them myself that it's just
never mentioned. This one time this summer, I noticed the Montgomery Academy over in Alabama. There was an acknowledgement, a little bit of an acknowledgement. I don't know if anything else has happened by it, but that, as far as I know, it is the only one that has ever uttered the first word about it.
And I really don't, on a certain level, I don't understand why. I think you could certainly be forgiven if you were relocated there with your family. You took a job down somewhere in the South, and there was an independent private school. Nobody thinks the South does much with education anyway, and you might be looking for, could we afford to send our kids to a private school? You could walk into one of those and probably notice it was a great deal paler than you might have expected, but there would be nothing to tell you that that's the background of the school.
Right.
One of the writers for the school that was the subject of The Blind Side with Sandra Bullock, Jackie Clowney, wrote a story about Briar Crest Baptist in Memphis, and she went there. She didn't understand the story of her school until she heard about this project, and she started thinking about, That was my school. So they do everything they can to cover up this history. So people even there don't know it. I've heard multiple people that are involved with academies now and have heard about my project and talked to me about it, said, oh, was that my school? And yes, it was. Yes.
Fascinating. And I know you're going through your slides. I'll ask it after you've finished.
I think this is something from a Citizens Council publication. Yes, and see what the Citizens Council was saying. One of the first projects that should be undertaken in every community is the formation of a private school. Okay, Nick, we could move it along.
Wow.
Yeah, and here we are. It's a whole, the name of their magazine was The Citizen. And in fact, if anyone wants to just completely go down the rabbit hole one night, you can go to the University of Mississippi Library website, and they have all the archives of these old magazines by the Citizens Council. Here's something about the Citizens Council that for national listeners that may not be familiar with it. When Go Set a Watchman came out, Harper Lee's other book, when it came out a few years ago, and it was such a stunning thing that Atticus was such a racist in his conversation in the book, the meetings he was going to, and she uses the phrase, he was going to a Citizens Council meeting. And, and there was all this discussion, but I never saw any of the articles about it understand this really was a thing, and it was a national movement.
I will say I'm unfortunately, I'm a little bit cognizant of the time here. And the thing is I want to keep talking, but we got a couple questions from the audience, and I wonder if I could just give them to you really quick so that we get those in. We have a question from one of our very faithful viewers, Ms. Vivian, who's wondering for both of you who came out of these white segregation academies, how do you feel when you are around people of other races? I mean, I'm aware that I was formed in a very white-centric way, and it's my job. I would hope that that I act right. I'm trying, and I know it's my job to. It's my job to. The onus is on me to have increase my circle and widen my circle.
I would. I am sure somewhere in my house, my wife is leaning forward to listen to how I answer this question. My spouse is Jamaican. Our kids are biracial. My first spouse was African American. I am a repeat offender on this score, I guess. I think I did not really. I think it was when I moved to Detroit. Like I said, when I said something started to stink, being a reporter by instinct or whatever, I really wanted to find out what I didn't know. Just because you become a little bit aware of your white privilege and you don't necessarily like who you are, that doesn't mean you instantly know everything about Black America or Black people. That it's not implied there. And you don't just have to learn about Black America, you have to unlearn a lot. And I would say after bouncing around in a lot of places, Detroit, living in downtown Detroit certainly helped me do that. That was the first place I really had a lot of African-American friends, not only that I worked with, but that I socialized with. And then from my experience of working overseas, I just got really accustomed to being around people who didn't look like me.
And Renee, you had a question, right?
Well, I was just going to ask, sort of the postscript, whatever became of your two academies? Are they thriving? What's sort of the, we want a nice, tidy ending, in life, and it's not real. But what's the long term? Are they still surviving? What does it look like? What's the prognosis? Is there a self-awareness? You can answer any of this.
The one I went to in Greenwood, Hill Academy, it's thriving. It's on second generation. I'm sure there are probably 3 generations of families that have gone there. And it isn't. There's a Black enrollment there now. It's very small, but it's established in the community. It's embedded.
So I've been wondering about the name Pillow Academy. Is it in Pillow, Mississippi?
Isn't that funny? Because I just think about it. It was a family in Greenwood donated the land, the farmland. But to outside people like Pillow Academy, as opposed to Dust Revel Middle School,
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And Neely.
Yeah, the Starkville Academy is doing just fine. It's and really does. I've gone back once or twice, both to talk on this, both several years apart. But they have academically, it's really progressed. I think that most people, it's just part of town that and a part of life there. I don't think anybody feels bad or conflicted about going there, and I'm not implying that they necessarily should. My experiences were mine, and certainly they're not universal, and I wouldn't advocate them that way. Would advocate for people to be aware of what they're involved with, but it's not take part in white supremacy in this country is almost impossible. When I gave that speech to the kids, I said, it's like saying you're going to live in the United States and not participate in capitalism. You can't live in any suburb in America, basically. They were all FHA barred black people from living there. Black people were barred from all the VA loans after World War II. You cannot avoid dealing in some measure with white supremacy. You should just make your peace with it and be aware of what you're doing.
Right. That's a great lesson.
That's awareness. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. You should just, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I want to say on the behalf of a lot of my schoolmates who I'm sure would just, throw rocks at me and say I'm consumed with white guilt or something else. I don't think they're laying awake at night being conflicted, and I'm not telling them that they should. So there would be a lot of responsible people with good jobs raising wonderful families who would disagree with me just about 100%. And I want to make it clear that I think that's a valid viewpoint. It's one I disagree with. But I just find that type of school system to be so problematic with an easy answer of just go to the public school that has a lot of other benefits. You get a lot of other educational aspects that you wouldn't get there. At going to Starkville Academy, I was so dim that I thought at 5'7" and 150 pounds that I was going to play SEC football. I probably would have been disabused of that notion to my benefit much earlier if I had been going to school in a more competitive environment football-wise, and might have figured out that really my better talents would have been something in writing, music, something like that, where there would have been a larger environment that I could have fit in a little easier with.
Great takeaways.
This has been great. I'm in the thankless position of having to watch time, which we are now at. And so first of all, this has been amazing. What people are like unofficially, we are planning, it's unofficial because we haven't asked the people yet, but we are hoping to do a follow-up event in March with some of the names that you've talked about and that we share in common in terms of the admissions project. So we're hoping to do a follow-up, and we'll keep you in touch, for everybody if we do that. And I would certainly love to talk to you both again as well. So maybe wait to hear more. But we really, really appreciate all of your time. So thank you both, Ellen Ann and Neely, for taking the time to be with us this evening and for the work that you're doing, the project, and for speaking so openly and frankly and bringing this to the forefront. For those of you watching, thank you so much for joining us. You can learn more about the Academy Stories by visiting theacademystories.com. You can also check them out on social media at Stories Academy on Twitter. Is that the same handle on Facebook and that you have? Is it at Stories Academy on Facebook? Okay.
It is, and now the site that has all of it, the Academy Stories and the public schools, is admissionsprojects.com. There's an S in each one, admissionsprojects.com.
Okay, so check out admissionsprojects.com. Neelys Tucker's books can be found at your library. PGC MLS can help you. Even if you don't live here, they can give you a virtual library card or your favorite independent bookstore. And I have to thank again Nick Brown, who's been behind the scenes. You've heard his name. He did our opening. He has just been an amazing partner to our office and to our agency. We would not be able to do half what we do without them. So thank you to Nick and to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. And on that note, we have a bunch of other great things coming up. I'm just going to highlight a few of them, but you should check out our event pages. I'll get to that in a second. On January 19th, we are in conversation with Kate Anderson Brower for an Inauguration Eve special event. On January 21st at 4 p.m., we are debuting a young adult book group where we're going to talk about Lee Bardugo's blockbuster novel, Six of Crows. You can learn about these and all of our other upcoming events by going to pgcmls.info/events or by checking out the Human Relations Commission events page at tinyurl.com, PGC events, which is not tiny, but I'm hoping it's memorable. I also encourage you to follow us on Twitter at HRC PG County and the library across all social media platforms at PGCMLS. Once again, thank you to all of our guests this evening. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Neely. Thank you, Ellen Ann. And of course, thank you to Nick. And thank you all of you for viewing.
Thanks.